The bar on station Theta 7 stank of recycled air and alien liquor. Sat in the corner booth, nursing a drink that tasted like copper and regret. 20 years of service, 12 tour across 4 quadrants, and now he was reduced to this, babysitting cargo freighters on the ass end of known space. The above the bar flickered with the usual feeds: sports from Earth, political arguments from the colonies, trading prices for helium-3. Wasn't watching any of it. His eyes were fixed on his glass, watching the amber liquid swirl with artificial gravity. That's when the feed changed. Breaking news from the diplomatic station at 4:42 B, the announcer said, her face professionally neutral. Tensions escalate during first contact negotiations with the collective. Looked up, 4:42 B. He knew that station. Third attempt at peaceful contact with a species that had been aggressively expanding into human space for the past 5 years. The diplomats kept insisting that communication was possible, that war could be avoided. The screen showed the grand plaza of the diplomatic station. Humans in formal suits stood alongside representatives from a dozen allied species. They towered over everyone, their crystalline bodies refracting the station's lights into rainbow patterns. They were beautiful in the way a knife blade is beautiful, sharp and cold and dangerous. Watched as one of the negotiators gestured toward something off-screen. His translator implant kicked in, feeding the alien's words directly into his auditory cortex. "This symbol of yours," they said, his voice like breaking glass, "it means much to you." The camera panned to show what he was pointing at. The flag. Old Earth's flag, the one that predated the colonial expansion, the one that still flew on every human vessel and station. 50 stars on blue, 13 stripes of red and white. Simple, ancient, sacred. "It represents our heritage," the human ambassador replied carefully. "The foundation of what we've become." "Interesting," they said. What happened next took 3 seconds. They reached forward with appendages that moved too fast for human eyes to follow. He grabbed the flag from its mount, the metal screeching as it tore free. The ambassador stepped forward, hand raised in protest. They ignored him. With deliberate slowness, the alien produced a plasma igniter from somewhere within his crystalline body. The kind used for emergency repairs, for cutting through bulkheads. The flame burned white-hot. He held the flag up for everyone to see. The camera zoomed in, catching every detail. The fabric, woven with fibers from Earth itself, brought across light years at tremendous expense. The colors, chosen centuries ago by people long dead but never forgotten. They touched the flame to the fabric. It burned. Old-style cotton burned fast, the fire racing across the stripes, consuming the stars. The white smoke curled upward in the station's recycled atmosphere. They held it until the last piece crumbled to ash, then let the remains drift to the floor. "This is what we think of your symbols," he said. "This is what we think of your species. You are fuel waiting to burn." The bar had gone silent, realized he was standing, though he didn't remember getting up. His glass had fallen to the floor, the synthetic material bouncing once before rolling away. Around him, every human in the bar stood frozen, staring at the screen. The ambassador's face on the screen had gone pale. "This is a diplomatic station. You've just committed an act that..." "That what?" This laughter sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Your species mistakes patience for weakness. This negotiation is over. You have 48 hours to evacuate this station. Then we take it. This sector belongs to the collective now." The feed cut to the news anchor, who looked rattled despite her professional composure. "The Secretary General has called an emergency session of the Colonial Defense Council. Initial reports suggest that multiple fleet elements are moving toward human space. We'll bring you more information as..." Someone turned off the screen. The silence in the bar stretched like a rubber band, tension building with each passing second. Could hear his own heartbeat, feel the pulse in his temples. His hands were shaking, not from fear. From something else entirely, something he'd learned to control during 2 decades in the Navy SEALs but never quite eliminated. Rage. Not the hot, explosive kind that burned out fast. The cold kind, the surgical kind, the kind that didn't make you stupid, just very, very focused. An alien at the next table, some species didn't recognize with too many eyes and not enough sense, spoke up. "Perhaps this is for the best. They are powerful. Resistance would only lead to more conflict if humans simply relocated to other sectors." Moved before he thought about it. 3 steps, and he was at the alien's table. His hand slammed down on the surface hard enough to crack the synthetic wood. "Say that again," said quietly, "please." The alien's eyes widened, all 6 of them. "I merely meant that pragmatism." "You think we should run?" His voice never rose above conversational volume. "You think because some crystal-skinned bastard burned a flag, we should pack up and abandon territory, abandon stations, abandon people?" "It was just a symbol." "It was our symbol," leaned closer. "You know what that flag means? Every star on that field represents blood, real blood from real people who died so that humans could be free, free to explore, free to live, free to exist without asking permission from things like The alien tried to back away, but his chair was against the wall. "I don't want any trouble." "Neither did we," straightened up, his eyes sweeping the bar. Every human was watching him now. Some looked angry, some looked scared, some looked both. "But trouble found us anyway, it always does." He walked back to his booth and picked up his communicator. It was old, military grade, the kind that never quite leaves your hand even after you resign your commission. 3 years since he'd used it for anything but watching old movies and reading news feeds. Pulled up his contact list. Most of the names were grayed out, retired or dead or just lost to the vastness of space. But some were still active, still in the service, still ready. He started with. The call connected after 2 rings. A face appeared on the small screen, older than remembered but still recognizable. Sharp eyes, a scar across the chin from that operation on Tau. Said, "Thought you were done with all this." "Thought so too," replied. "You see the news." "Yeah, I saw." "What are you thinking?" Was quiet for a moment. In the background could hear announcements, the kind you only heard on military vessels. Was shipboard somewhere, probably en route to a patrol zone. "I'm thinking the brass is going to be cautious," finally said. "Diplomatic channels, measured responses, all that political bullshit while they try to figure out how to handle this without starting a full-scale war." "That's what I'm thinking too." "You're calling in the marker." It wasn't a question. 5 years ago, on a moon whose name couldn't even pronounce, had been pinned down by hostile forces. Had gone back for him against orders, through 3 kilometers of hell, and dragged his bleeding body to the extraction point. Had said if ever needed anything, anything at all, he just had to ask. "I'm calling it in," confirmed. Smiled, it wasn't a nice smile. "What do you need?" "Access, intel, transportation, equipment." Paused, and about 4 days of blind eyes. 4 days, that's specific. "Gave us 48 hours to evacuate the diplomatic station. That's 2 days. I'll need 2 more for what I'm planning." "Which is?" "Better if you don't know. Plausible deniability." Laughed, sharp and bitter. "I've known you for 15 years. If you're calling me after watching that broadcast, there's only one thing you could be planning, and it's not plausible, and I won't have any deniability." "So that's a no." "Hell no, it's not a no," leaned closer to his screen. "I'm in, whatever you need. But you understand what you're starting here. They aren't some backwater raiders. They've got numbers, technology, territory. If you do what I think you're going to do, there's no walking it back. It's war." Thought about the flag burning. Thought about the words. Thought about every alien species that looked at humanity and saw weakness, saw prey, saw something to be conquered or negotiated with or pushed around. "They started the war when they burned that flag," said. "I'm just going to finish it." Nodded slowly. Okay, I'm in, but you can't do this alone. How many people do you have?" "Right now, just you." "That's not enough." "It will be." Ended the call and started scrolling through his contact list again. Names from a lifetime ago, from operations that were still classified, from nights spent in hostile territory where the only thing between you and death was the person watching your back. The next call went to. She answered immediately, her face appearing on the screen with the same no-nonsense expression she'd worn during their last mission together 7 years ago. "I saw the news. And I'm already packing. Where do we meet?" That was never wasted words, never questioned the mission. She'd been his second in command on 11 operations, and she'd never once let him down. "Station Theta 7. Dock 23C, can you get here in 36 hours? "I can get there in 30. What's the op?" "Retribution." Smiled, "Good, I was hoping you'd say that. See you in 30. The calls continued. Some people he reached immediately, some took longer. 2 didn't answer at all and had to assume they were too deep in civilized life now, too far removed from the warrior they'd been. 3 said no and understood. They had families, responsibilities, lives that didn't include running off to start a war. But most said yes. Who'd lost his leg on station but still qualified as expert marksman? Yes. Who'd retired to run a cargo company but still kept her old gear cleaned and ready? Yes. Who'd married and had kids but still remembered what the flag meant? Yes. Not related to despite the shared name, who'd become a priest of all things but still believed in righteous fury? Yes. By the time finished his calls, he had 12 people committed, 12 against a fleet element, 12 against an empire that had been expanding for decades, 12 against impossible odds. It was more than enough. Stood up from the booth and headed for the door. He had 36 hours before his team assembled. 36 hours to acquire what they'd need. 36 hours to plan an operation that would either change the course of human relations forever or get them all killed. Probably both. As he walked through the corridors of Station Theta 7, his mind was already working through the logistics. They'd need a ship, small enough to avoid immediate detection but powerful enough to do real damage. They'd need intel on fleet positions, defensive capabilities, response times. They'd need weapons, the kind that weren't available on the civilian market. And they'd need luck. Had never believed much in luck. He believed in training, preparation, and violence of action. But even he had to admit that what he was planning would require something beyond just skill. His communicator buzzed, again. "I've got your intel packet," said without preamble. "Sending it now, encrypted on your old military channel. You remember the codes?" "I remember." "Good, this data is 24 hours old. Best we have on fleet positions near 442B. There's a lot of ships, a lot." "How many?" 47 capital vessels. Unknown number of support craft. They're serious about taking that station. Felt his jaw tighten. 47 capital vessels. That wasn't an occupation force. That was an invasion fleet. They weren't just making a statement, they were preparing for war. What about the diplomatic station, the people there? Evacuation is. Most of the essential personnel are already gone. The ambassador is refusing to leave until the last transport. Stubborn bastard. He's doing his job. So are you, apparently. I've also arranged for a ship. It's not much, but it's fast and it's got teeth. And it's completely off book. As far as official records go, it doesn't exist. Where? Dock 23C, your dock. I figured you'd want privacy. Smiled, you're a good friend. I'm an accomplice to whatever insanity you're about to commit. That's what I am. But yeah, we're friends too. One more thing, the brass knows something's happening. They're not stupid. They can see the same personnel movements I'm facilitating. They're going to figure out what you're planning. Let them. And if they try to stop you? Thought about that? Orders had always mattered to him. Chain of command, discipline, the structure that made military operations possible. But there were things that mattered more than orders. Things like honor and dignity and the simple fact that some insults couldn't be tolerated. Then they'll have to catch me first, said. Laughed, that's what I thought you'd say. Good hunting, and for what it's worth, I hope you make those crystal bastards regret every molecule of that flag they burned. That's the plan. Ended the call and continued toward Dock 23C. His team would arrive soon. The ship was waiting, and somewhere out past the rim of civilized space, they were preparing to take a diplomatic station by force, thinking that humanity would back down, would negotiate, would choose peace over principle. They were wrong. Had seen the flag burn. He'd watched it happen in real time, broadcast across the galaxy for everyone to see. And in that moment, something had crystallized in his mind with perfect clarity. They had made a mistake, not the mistake of burning the flag, though that was bad enough. The real mistake was thinking that humans would accept it. That humanity had grown soft during its expansion into space, had forgotten the blood that had bought its freedom, had lost the will to fight. In 3 days, thought, they would learn different. In 3 days, they'd learn what happened when you pushed humans too far. In 3 days, a Navy SEAL was going to wage a war. Dock 23C smelled like ozone and machine oil, stood in front of the ship had promised, and despite everything, he felt a smile tug at his lips. It wasn't much to look at, a modified Corvette-class vessel that had seen better decades. The hull was with micrometeorite impacts and poorly patched armor plating. Someone had painted over the original name, leaving only a ghost outline and the new designation. Whisper. "She's perfect," said to the empty dock. He ran his hand along the hull as he walked around the ship, checking seals and sensor arrays with the practiced eye of someone who'd lived and died by equipment reliability. The Whisper was small, maybe 40 meters bow to stern, with a crew capacity of 8 in comfort or 15 in hell. Her engines were overpowered for her size, the kind of modification you made when speed mattered more than efficiency. And mounted along her spine were 4 torpedo tubes that definitely hadn't been part of the original design. Climbed aboard through the ventral hatch, his boots clanging on the metal ladder. The interior was cramped and functional, all exposed conduits and bare metal walls. No artificial gravity in dock mode, so he pulled himself through the corridors using the handholds, checking each compartment as he went. Bridge, engineering, weapons control, medical bay the size of a closet, crew quarters that were basically coffin bunks welded to the walls, storage lockers that were already stocked with supplies, ration packs, medical kits, ammunition for weapons that weren't officially loaded yet. Had been thorough. Pulled himself to the bridge and strapped into the captain's chair. The console lit up at his touch, biometric sensors reading his fingerprints and confirming his identity. A message appeared on the main screen. Access granted. LCDR USN RET. Welcome aboard the Whisper. All systems are nominal. Fuel cells at 100%. Life support rated for 30 days. Weapons systems locked pending authorization code. Good luck, you crazy bastard. R. Typed in the authorization code from memory, a string of numbers and letters he'd been assigned 20 years ago and never used since leaving the service. The weapons systems came online with a low hum that he felt through the deck plating. 4 Mark VII torpedoes, military grade, with plasma warheads capable of cracking a capital ship's shields. Rail guns mounted in the forward turrets, firing depleted uranium slugs at a fraction of light speed. Point defense lasers for incoming missiles. And something else, something that made Whistle low when he saw it in the manifest. An EMP charge, the kind they'd stopped manufacturing after the Geneva Conventions of 2247 because they were considered too indiscriminate. One pulse could disable every unshielded electronic system within 10 kilometers. Nasty, effective, and completely illegal. "You beautiful maniac," muttered. He spent the next hour familiarizing himself with the ship systems, running diagnostics and memorizing the control layout. The Whisper was old but well-maintained, her systems responsive and reliable. She'd do. By the time the first member of his team arrived, had already plotted 3 different approach vectors to 442B and begun analyzing the fleet positions from intel packet. Came through the airlock like she owned the place, her duffel bag floating behind her in the zero-gravity environment. She'd cut her hair since had last seen her, the long braids replaced by a severe crop that made her look even more dangerous than usual. She said, grabbing a handhold and pulling herself to a stop in front of him, "Nice ship, probably won't explode." "High praise. I'm a realist." She looked around the cramped bridge, taking in the displays and control stations. "We expecting company, or is this a solo operation that somehow requires a military corvette?" "Company's coming, 10 more will be cramped. I've worked in worse conditions. Remember that cargo container on Titan?" Remembered, 3 days, 8 people, one container the size of a small bathroom, all while trying to surveil a smuggling operation without being detected. He'd sworn he'd never complain about cramped quarters again after that. "This'll be luxury compared to Titan," he said. Smiled, but it faded quickly. "I saw the full broadcast, the parts they didn't show on the public feeds. One of my contacts at Fleet Intelligence sent me the raw footage. And they didn't just burn the flag," he made a speech afterward, called humanity primitive mammals playing at civilization. Said we were soft, weak, that we'd expanded into space by luck and alliance with stronger species, not through any merit of our own. She paused. "He said that burning the flag was a mercy, that we should thank them for showing us our place in the universal order before we got ourselves killed by species that actually mattered." Felt his hands tighten on the armrests of the chair. "They really think we're nothing. They think we're prey, And the worst part is that the Galactic Council is calling for calm. They're saying both sides need to de-escalate, like we're somehow responsible for this. We didn't burn their symbols. No, we didn't. But half the Council species are afraid of they've been expanding aggressively for decades, and nobody's been willing to stand up to them. The Council sees this as an opportunity to avoid a wider war. They're pressuring the Secretary General to negotiate. Negotiate what? They told us to evacuate in 48 hours. The Council wants us to give them the sector, pull back our settlements, abandon the stations, cede the territory. They're calling it strategic repositioning for the sake of galactic peace. Laughed a harsh sound with no humor in it. Strategic repositioning, that's one way to describe retreat and surrender. Some people in the government are considering it. The economic analysis says that sector isn't worth a war. Too few resources, too far from the core worlds, too expensive to defend. It's not about economics. I know that, you know that, but politicians think differently. Pulled herself into the co-pilot's chair and strapped in. So what's the plan? We going to stop an invasion fleet with 1 corvette and 12 people? Not exactly. Pulled up a holographic display in the center of the bridge. The system around 442B materialized in blue light, showing the diplomatic station, the fleet positions, and the evacuation routes humanity was using. They have 47 capital ships, said, pointing to the red markers clustered around the system's edge. They're arranged in a standard blockade formation, controlling all the major approach vectors. They're not expecting resistance, so their defensive posture is oriented outward, watching for a potential military response from human space. Which isn't coming. Which isn't coming, agreed. Fleet Command is still arguing about whether a military response is even appropriate. By the time they make a decision, the 48 hours will be up and the station will be occupied. So we can't stop the occupation. No, but we can make them regret it. Zoomed in on one of the red markers. This is the flagship, the Eternity's Edge. It's where their fleet commander is stationed. According to Intel, it's also where the bastard who burned our flag is currently residing. Leaned forward, studying the display. You want to kill him. I want to send a message. They think we're soft. They think we'll negotiate back down, accept their dominance because fighting back is too costly. I'm going to show them they're wrong. By attacking their flagship in the middle of their own fleet. Yes, that's suicide. Maybe, or maybe it's exactly the kind of crazy that nobody expects. He zoomed in further, showing the flagship's position relative to the others. Look at their formation. The Eternity's Edge is in the center, protected on all sides, but they're spaced for optimal firing solutions against incoming threats, not close protection. There's gaps, small ones, but they exist. Small enough for the whisper. If we're fast and we time it right. Studied the display for a long moment. You're talking about threading a needle through a fleet of warships, getting close enough to the flagship to do meaningful damage, and then escaping before they vaporize us. That's the plan. It's insane. Yes, I'm in. Over the next 28 hours, the rest of the team arrived. Each one came with their own skills, their own reasons for saying yes, their own memories of what the flag meant. Showed up with a prosthetic leg that was more combat enhancement than medical device, built-in stabilizers for long-range shooting, and enough computational power to calculate ballistic trajectories in real time. He'd been a sniper in the Marines before the injury, and he still was, just with better hardware. Brought her own ship into dock next to the Whisper, a cargo vessel she'd retrofitted with hidden compartments and enhanced sensors. For reconnaissance, she explained. You'll need eyes on the target before you go in. I can't fight, but I can tell you what you're fighting. Arrived with his oldest daughter despite protests. She's 19, said. Old enough to serve, and she asked to come. I'm not going to tell her she can't defend what her grandfather died for. The daughter, Sarah, looked young and scared and determined, remembered that look. He'd worn it himself a lifetime ago. The priest came with a duffel bag full of first aid supplies and a well-worn Bible. I'm a medic first, he said. The spiritual counseling is just a side job, and I figure you're going to need someone who can patch you up after whatever insanity you're planning. 3 more arrived in a group. Sister Maria, a former Marine pilot who'd been dishonorably discharged for punching a superior officer who'd made racist comments. Jackson, a demolitions expert who'd left the service after his partner was killed in a training accident. And Williams, who'd been Black Ops for so long that wasn't entirely sure what his real name was. The team gathered in the Whisper's small common area, 12 people in a space meant for 8, floating in zero gravity and holding onto whatever handholds they could find. Looked at each face, seeing the years and scars and determination. "You all know why we're here," said. 3 days ago, they burned our flag, told us we were nothing, told us to run. Some people are listening. The government is considering giving them what they want, abandoning the sector, calling it peace. "Bullshit," someone muttered, thought it was Jackson. "Yeah, it's bullshit, but it's also reality. We're not going to get official support for this. What we're about to do is unauthorized, illegal, and probably suicidal. If we succeed, the brass might court-martial us. If we fail, we'll be dead and they'll disavow everything." "So why are we doing it?" Sarah asked. Her voice was quiet but steady. Looked at her. "Because somebody has to. Because if we let them do this without consequences, every other aggressive species in the galaxy will think humanity is easy prey. Because that flag they burned represented real people, real sacrifice, real blood. And because sometimes the right thing to do isn't the safe thing or the authorized thing or even the smart thing. It's just right." The common area was silent, except for the hum of the ship's life support systems. "We're going to attack the flagship," continued. "We're going to get in close, do as much damage as possible, and get out alive. It's not going to stop the occupation. It's not going to win a war. But it's going to send a message. Humanity doesn't back down, push us, and we push back harder." "How much damage are we talking about?" Williams asked. His voice had the flat affect of someone who'd done terrible things for good reasons and lost sleep over neither. "Enough to make them remember us," said. "Enough to make them think twice about pushing further into human space. Enough to buy time for the people who are better at politics than us to figure out a real response. And if we die doing this, then we die, but we die standing up, though we'll remember that too." Spoke up from where she floated near the back. "I've analyzed the tactical situation. The approach is planning has maybe a 30% chance of success. That's if everything goes perfectly, if our intel is accurate, if they react exactly how we predict. More realistically, we're looking at 10 to 15%. "Those are terrible odds," Maria said. "Yes, agreed. But they're not zero, and sometimes 10% is all you need." Laughed, the sound surprisingly warm given the circumstances. "I've taken shots with worse odds than that. At least this time I'll have a ship instead of just a rifle." "I'm in," said. "But I'm not going on the attack run. Someone needs to document this, get the footage out if things go wrong. I'll stay in my ship, record everything, and make sure the galaxy knows what happened here." "Agreed," said. "Anyone else want to back out? This is your last chance, no shame in it." Nobody moved. "Okay then." Pulled up the tactical display again, the hologram casting blue light across their faces. "Here's how we're going to do this. Goes in first, running passive sensors only, pretending to be a lost cargo ship. She'll give us real-time intel on fleet positions and any changes since data. Once she's in position, the Whisper follows." He traced a path through the fleet formation with his finger. "We'll be running dark, minimal emissions, using the radiation from the system's star to mask our approach. There's a gap here, between the 3rd and 4th battle groups. It's narrow, maybe 5 kilometers across, and they've got sensor coverage. But if we're fast and lucky, we can slip through before they realize we're not just background noise." "And then," asked. "Then we light up every system we have and burn straight for the flagship. We'll have maybe 90 seconds before the fleet reacts and starts shooting. In that 90 seconds, we need to close to torpedo range, fire everything we have, and trigger the EMP charge." "EMP," the priest looked alarmed. "Those are banned weapons." "I know, but they're also the only thing that's going to let us survive the next part. The EMP will disable every ship in a 10-kilometer radius, including us. But we'll be ready for it. We'll have backup systems, manual controls, and about 60 seconds to restart the Whisper's main systems before they do the same." 60 seconds to restart a ship's main systems is impossible, Maria said. "The boot sequence alone takes 90. It takes 90 if you do it safely. You're going to be in engineering. Your job is to bypass every safety protocol we have and force the reactor back online. You'll probably shave 10 years off its operational and risk a meltdown, but we only need it to work for about 5 minutes after the EMP. 5-minute war, William said. That's what this is, 5 minutes of hell, then we run. That's exactly what this is, confirmed. 5 minutes to prove that humans aren't prey. 5 minutes to make them understand they made a mistake. 5 minutes to change the course of history or die trying. Jackson raised his hand like he was in school. Question, what about the torpedoes? Even with plasma warheads, 4 torpedoes aren't going to destroy a capital ship. They don't have to destroy it, said. They just have to hurt it, break their shields, damage their hull, kill their crew, make them bleed. The point isn't to win the battle, the point is to fight one. And the escape. Once the Whisper is back online, we burn hard for the edge of the system. The EMP will have bought us time, and the confusion will buy us more. We'll have already moved to the extraction point. We rendezvous with her, transfer to her ship if necessary, and jump to hyperspace before they can reorganize. Pulled up the fleet disposition again. You're assuming they'll be disorganized, but these are military professionals. Even after an EMP, they'll have protocols. They'll have backup ships outside the blast radius. They'll have response plans. I know, that's why we're going to do something they don't expect. Which is? Smiled, it wasn't a nice smile. We're going to broadcast. Open channel, maximum power aimed right at their flagship, and we're going to tell them exactly who we are and why we're there. That's insane, Maria said. You'll be giving away your position. They'll already know our position. We'll have just hit them with 4 torpedoes and an EMP, but they won't understand why. They'll think it's a military operation, a covert strike, something with strategic value. When we broadcast, when we tell them this is about the flag, about honor, about making them pay for their insult, they'll hesitate. Not for long, but long enough. You're betting our lives on enemy hesitation, William said. I'm betting our lives on enemy psychology. They think we're predictable, rational, that we'll always choose survival over principle. When we prove them wrong, when we show them we're willing to die just to bloody their nose, it'll break their threat assessment model. They'll have to recalculate. And those few seconds of recalculation are what keep us alive long enough to escape. The team was quiet, processing the plan. It was crazy. It was risky. It relied on assumptions about enemy behavior that might be completely wrong, but it was also the only plan they had. When do we launch? Asked. Checked his chronometer. 32 hours until the deadline expires. We launch in 24. That gives us 8 hours to get into position and wait for the exact moment when they think they've won. Why wait for that moment specifically? Because that's when they'll be least alert. They'll be celebrating, organizing the occupation, congratulating themselves on intimidating humanity into retreat. And that's when 12 humans in a beaten-up Corvette are going to teach them that we're not so easy to intimidate. The meeting broke up after that, each team member heading to their assigned stations to familiarize themselves with the ship and prepare for the mission. Stayed on the bridge with, watching the tactical display and running simulations. You really think this will work? Asked after everyone else had left. Honestly, I think we have a 10% chance of pulling off the attack and maybe a 30% chance of surviving if we do. But I also think that even if we fail, even if we all die, it'll matter. Though we'll know that humans fought back. The rest of the galaxy will know. And maybe, just maybe, it'll inspire someone else to stand up the next time an aggressive species decides to test humanity's resolve. That's a lot of weight to put on 12 people and 1 ship. It's the weight we're choosing to carry, said. Nobody made us do this. We're here because we decided that some things are worth dying for. Nodded slowly. My grandmother used to tell me stories about Earth before the expansion, about wars fought over principles that seemed small in retrospect but were everything at the time. Freedom of speech, self-determination, the right to exist without permission from tyrants. She said that people forgot sometimes that those rights weren't free, that every generation had to decide whether they were worth fighting for. Sounds like a smart woman. She was, and she also said that the most dangerous people in any conflict were the ones who'd already decided they were willing to die. Not because they wanted to, but because they'd done the math and realized that some things mattered more than personal survival. Looked at his friend. We're those people now. Yeah, we are, smiled. Strange feeling, isn't it, knowing you're probably going to die in about 30 hours and being okay with it. I wouldn't say okay, but accepting. I've had a good life, done things I'm proud of, served with people I respected. If it ends in a blaze of glory while flipping off the there are worse ways to go. They worked through the night, refining the plan, running endless simulations, preparing for every contingency they could imagine. By the time the other team members started waking up for the pre-mission briefing and had optimized their approach vector, identified backup escape routes, and calculated the exact timing for the EMP detonation. It still looked impossible, but impossible had learned over 20 years of military service was the Whisper left Station Theta 7 without ceremony. No fanfare, no announcements, no recorded departure. One moment she was docked, the next she was sliding into the black between stations, her running lights dark and her emissions profile minimized to almost nothing. Sat in the captain's chair, his hands steady on the controls despite the adrenaline starting to build in his system. Around him, the bridge was a study in controlled tension. At navigation, Maria at the helm, Williams monitoring sensors. Everyone else was stationed throughout the ship, ready for their assigned roles. Said into the comm, "You're up." On the cargo vessel, Lucky Fortune, detached from her dock and began accelerating toward the hyperspace jump point. To any observer, she was just another civilian ship making a routine cargo run. Nobody would know that her holds were empty except for recording equipment and enough sensor gear to outfit a military reconnaissance vessel. "I'm away," his voice came through the comm, calm and professional. "ETA to 442B is 16 hours at standard civilian speeds. I'll begin passive scanning as soon as I'm in system and transmit to you on the encrypted channel." "Copy that, stay safe." "That's the plan, Lucky Fortune out." The Whisper continued her own journey, taking a longer route that would keep her hidden in the noise of commercial traffic. They had time now, hours before they needed to be in position, and used it to run his crew through final preparations. Was in engineering, running diagnostics on the reactor and memorizing the bypass sequences he'd need to use after the EMP. The man had traded his priest's collar for engineer's coveralls, but noticed he still wore a small cross on a chain around his neck. "You pray much?" asked over the internal comm. "Every day," replied. "More since I saw your plan. You know this reactor restart you want me to do violates about 40 different safety regulations." "I know. And that if I mess up the timing by even a few seconds, we'll either fail to restart at all or trigger a catastrophic meltdown." "I know that too. Just making sure we're all clear on the risks. On an unrelated note, I'm also available for last rites if anyone's interested." Smiled despite the situation. "I'll keep that in mind." In the small armory, Jackson and were checking weapons and equipment. The torpedo controls were automated, but they'd need small arms if anything went wrong during the escape. Had brought his own rifle, a custom piece with a scope that could calculate gravitational effects and atmospheric density in milliseconds. Useless on a ship, but he cleaned it anyway, his mechanical leg locked to the deck to keep him stable in the zero gravity. "You really think we'll need these?" Jackson asked, holding up a plasma pistol. "Probably not," said, "but I'd rather have them and not need them than need them and be shit out of luck." Words to live by. And his daughter Sarah were in the crew quarters, the older man talking quietly to the younger one. Couldn't hear what they were saying, but he saw Sarah's expression shift from nervous to determined. Whatever was telling her, it was working. The hours passed slowly. Found himself thinking about the flag, about what it represented. He'd grown up on a colony world, third generation removed from Earth, but the stories had been passed down. The revolution against tyranny, the civil war to end slavery, the world wars that nearly destroyed everything. The first ventures into space, risky and experimental and driven by hope. Every star on that flag represented a state, and every state represented people who'd fought for something they believed in. Freedom, justice, equality, the right to determine their own destiny without asking permission from kings or dictators or alien empires. They had burned that history. They'd reduced centuries of human struggle and sacrifice to ashes, and they'd done it casually like it meant nothing. That was the real insult, not the physical destruction of fabric and dye, but the dismissal of everything it represented. The implication that humanity's story didn't matter, that their struggles were insignificant, that their values were jokes to be mocked by superior species. His hands tightened on the armrests. They were about to learn that humanity's story was far from over. 14 hours into the journey, his voice crackled over the encrypted channel. "Lucky Fortune to Whisper. I'm approaching the 442B system now. Initiating passive scans. Stand by for data transmission. Brought up the tactical display. Copy that, we're receiving your feed. The hologram updated in real time as sensors swept the system. The fleet was exactly where Intel had placed them, but there were differences. 3 additional capital ships had arrived, bringing the total to 50. The formation had tightened slightly, defensive posture more pronounced. They're expecting something, said. Look at the sensor coverage. They've got overlapping fields everywhere. Can we still get through? Studied the display, her fingers dancing across the console as she ran calculations. Maybe. The gap is still there, but it's smaller now. We'll have to thread it perfectly, and if we're even slightly off course, they'll detect us before we can get into attack position. What's the probability? Revised down to 8%. Nodded, I've worked with worse. Went. Right now. 2 more hours passed before they received the next transmission from. I've got eyes on the flagship, she said. The Eternity's Edge is positioned exactly where your intel indicated, center of the formation. She's a big girl, 3 kilometers long, heavy shielding, multiple weapon batteries. I'm picking up massive energy signatures from her reactor cores. This thing could probably take on a dozen human destroyers and come out ahead. We're not trying to destroy her, reminded her. Just hurt her. You'll hurt her all right, assuming your torpedoes can get through those shields, which, just for the record, I have serious doubts about. Let me worry about the torpedoes. It's your funeral. Lucky Fortune is moving to the extraction point now. I'll be waiting. Try not to die before you get there. I'll do my best. The Whisper continued her approach, sliding through the darkness between stars. They were running completely dark now, no emissions at all except for the faint heat signature from their life support systems. Maria flew with the kind of precision that came from years of experience, making minute adjustments to their course that kept them hidden in the background radiation from the system's star. 4 hours from the deadline, gathered the crew in the common area one last time. This is it, he said. In 4 hours, they will officially claim the diplomatic station and the surrounding sector. They'll think they've won. They'll think humanity backed down, and that's when we're going to hit them. He pulled up the attack plan one last time, walking through each phase of the operation. Phase 1, final approach. Maria gets us through the gap in their formation. If we're detected during this phase, we abort and run. No shame in that. Better to live and fight another day than die before we even get a shot off. Phase 2, the attack run. Once we're through the gap, we light up everything. Full power to engines, full power to shields. We'll burn straight for the Eternity's Edge at maximum acceleration. Though we'll have maybe 90 seconds to react. Their close-in defense systems will engage. We'll be taking fire from multiple directions. Maria, your job is to keep us alive long enough to reach torpedo range. Maria nodded, her expression grim. Phase 3, weapons release. Once we're in range, Jackson fires all 4 torpedoes in a spread pattern targeting the flagship's shield generators and bridge section. We're not trying to kill the ship. We're trying to kill specific systems. The plasma warheads should do the job if they hit. Phase 4, EMP detonation. Immediately after torpedo launch, Williams triggers the EMP charge. This will disable every ship in a 10-kilometer radius, including us. You'll have approximately 60 seconds to get our reactor back online. Not 61 seconds, not 59 seconds, 60. Made the sign of the cross, no pressure. Phase 5, broadcast. While is working on the reactor, I'll be on the comm. We're going to tell the exactly who we are and why we're there. Open channel, maximum power, straight at their flagship. Then we'll use the backup transmitter to send the same message to every news outlet in human space. The galaxy needs to know this happened. Phase 6, escape. Once the reactor is online, we burn hard for the extraction point. We'll be waiting. They will be recovering from the EMP, but they'll be coming after us fast. We'll have maybe 5 minutes before they're organized enough to pursue effectively. That's our window. 5 minutes, Williams repeated. Not a lot of time. It's enough, it has to be. Sarah raised her hand. What's my job? You haven't mentioned me. Looked at the young woman. You're with me on the bridge. When the shooting starts, when things get chaotic, I need someone who can stay calm and monitor systems. Communications, damage control, whatever needs attention. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Good, everyone else, you know your assignments. Get some rest if you can. We launch in 3 hours. Nobody rested. Knew they wouldn't? He didn't either. Instead, he spent the remaining time in his quarters, staring at a picture he'd kept for 20 years. A young man in a Navy uniform, fresh out of training, proud and eager and naive. That man had believed in honor and duty and the idea that serving something greater than yourself was the highest calling a person could answer. Still believed those things. But now he also believed that sometimes honor required you to break rules, and duty required you to disobey orders, and service required you to risk everything on a plan that any reasonable person would call insane. He wondered what his younger self would think of what he was about to do. The kid in the picture grinned back at him, frozen in time, forever young and full of hope. "Yeah," said to the picture, "you'd probably think it was awesome." The final countdown began. 2 hours ran through weapons checks with Jackson. Everything was green, all systems nominal, torpedoes loaded and ready. 1 hour, updated the tactical plan based on latest sensor data. The gap in the formation had shifted slightly, but it was still passable. 30 minutes. Reported from engineering that the reactor was purring like a kitten, and the bypass sequences were programmed and ready. 15 minutes. Maria began the final approach, her hands steady on the controls as she aimed the whisper at the narrow gap between two battle groups. 5 minutes. The entire crew was at their stations now, strapped in and ready. Could feel the tension through the deck plating, the collective held breath of 12 people about to do something monumentally stupid and vitally important. 1 minute. The whisper slipped through the outer edge of the sensor perimeter, hidden in the star's radiation, undetected and unnoticed. "We're through the gap," Maria whispered, as if speaking too loud might give them away. "Jesus, that was close. I could practically feel their sensors brushing past us." "Beautiful flying," said. "Now get us into position." The whisper drifted deeper into the formation, a ghost ship in the darkness. Could see the massive shapes of the capital ships, their crystalline hulls reflecting the system's star in rainbow patterns. They were beautiful and terrible, monuments to this power and confidence. And directly ahead, dominating the center of the formation, was the Eternity's Edge. 3 kilometers of crystalline armor and weapon systems, hanging in space like a shard of God's own mirror. Could see the bridge section, a glowing node near the front of the ship, where the who'd burned the flag was probably sitting right now, congratulating himself on intimidating humanity. Smiled. "All stations, final check-in," he said calmly. "Weapons ready," Jackson reported. "Engineering ready," said. "Sensors ready," Williams confirmed. "Navigation ready," stated. "Helm ready," Maria added. "Communications ready," Sarah said, her voice only slightly shaky. "Then let's go to work," said. Maria lighted up, all ahead flank speed, take us right down their throat. The Whisper's reactor blazed to full power, her engines burning white-hot as she accelerated toward the flagship. Every stealth system shut down, every emission suppression field collapsed, and suddenly the small corvette was the thing in the system. The noticed. Alarms shrieked across their fleet. Automated defense systems spun up, targeting solutions calculated in milliseconds. 50 capital ships suddenly knew there was an enemy vessel in their midst, and 47 of them had clear firing solutions. "Incoming fire," Williams announced, his voice professionally calm despite the situation. "Multiple sources, point defense engaging." The lit up with weapons fire. Particle beams, plasma bolts, kinetic slugs, all converging on the Whisper's position. The ship's shields flared with impacts, energy readings spiking as they absorbed impossible amounts of damage. "Shields at 70%, Sarah reported. 60%, 50. "Stay on target," ordered. Maria evasive pattern Delta 7. The Whisper jinked and wove through the incoming fire, Maria's piloting skills the only thing keeping them alive. A particle beam missed by meters. A plasma bolt grazed their port side. A kinetic slug passed so close that could hear it whistle through the hull. "Range to target 5 kilometers, called out. 4 kilometers, 3. "Torpedo range achieved," Jackson said. "Solution locked, firing." 4 torpedoes streaked from the Whisper's tubes, their plasma warheads leaving glowing trails across the darkness. They covered the distance to the Eternity's Edge in seconds, targeting specific points on the flagship's shield grid. The first torpedo hit a shield generator on the port side. The explosion was spectacular, a sphere of superheated plasma that overwhelmed the local shield section and caused a cascade failure. The second torpedo slipped through the gap, impacting directly on the hull. Crystalline armor shattered, fragments spinning away into space. The third and fourth torpedoes struck the bridge section, their combined detonations creating a fireball that engulfed the entire forward portion of the ship. "Hits confirmed," Jackson shouted. "Damage to shields and hull. Bridge section appears compromised." "Now," ordered, "Williams, trigger the EMP." Williams's hand came down on the detonation switch. The universe went white. Every electronic system within 10 kilometers died instantly. Shields collapsed. Engines shut down. Weapons went offline. Life support systems failed. Communication arrays went dark. The Eternity's Edge and 6 other capital ships in the immediate vicinity became dead metal floating in space, including the Whisper. The sudden silence was deafening. No engine hum, no system alerts, no calm chatter, just the sound of 12 people breathing in emergency lighting. Said into the darkness, clocks ticking. Onit's voice echoed up from engineering. "Bypassing safeties now, this is going to be ugly." Counted seconds in his head. 1, 2, 3. The emergency batteries would keep life support running for about 10 minutes. They had to be moving long before then. 15 seconds. Could see the fleet starting to react. The ships outside the EMP radius were maneuvering, trying to understand what had just happened. Some were moving to protect the disabled vessels. Others were searching for the threat. 30 seconds. "Come on," muttered. 45 seconds. The Eternity's Edge hung in space before them, damaged and dark. Could see atmosphere venting from the bridge section, debris floating away from the impact sites. They'd hurt her. God, they'd actually hurt her. 60 seconds. The reactor hummed to life. Lights flickered on across the bridge. Systems began rebooting, their diagnostic sequences scrolling across displays. The engine answered the helm control, and Maria's hands flew across her console. "We're live," shouted. "Reactor at 50% and climbing. We've got power." "Sarah, broadcast now," ordered. Sarah's fingers danced across the communication controls. "Channel open, you're on." Leaned forward in his chair, speaking into the comm with a voice that carried 20 years of service and 3 days of rage. "Attention collective, this is Commander United States Navy, retired. 3 days ago, your representative burned our flag. He called us weak. He called us prey. He said we would run rather than fight. He was wrong." He paused, letting the words hang in the void. "This attack was not authorized by my government. This was not a military operation. This was 12 humans in a single ship, acting on our own initiative because some things cannot be tolerated. You tried to humiliate us. Instead, you've reminded us who we are." Another pause. "Look at your flagship. Look at the damage. That's what 12 humans can do when you push us too far. Imagine what 100 could do. Imagine what 1,000 could do. Imagine what a species of 8 billion could do if you keep pushing." His voice dropped, becoming colder and harder. "We're not prey. We're predators who've been pretending to be civilized. You just reminded us what we really are. So here's your lesson for today. Next time you think about burning our symbols, remember the Eternity's Edge. Remember that humanity doesn't forgive. We don't forget. And we sure as hell don't run." He nodded to Sarah, who cut the transmission and immediately began broadcasting it on every frequency she could reach, aimed at every human vessel and station in range. "Message away," she said. "Every news outlet in 3 sectors is going to have that recording in the next 5 minutes." "Good," said Maria. "Get us out of here." The Whisper's engines burned at full power, accelerating away from the formation. Behind them, the Eternity's Edge was starting to recover, her backup systems coming online, emergency power being rerouted to critical systems. But they were slow, confused, still trying to understand what had happened. The Whisper was already 3 kilometers away, and accelerating when the first pursuit ship began to move. "Contact bearing 270, Williams announced. "Destroyer class accelerating to intercept, ETA 4 minutes. "This is Whisper," said into the comm. "We're inbound hot, hope you're ready to move." "I'm ready," his voice came back. "And I recorded everything. The attack, the damage, your broadcast, all of it. This is going on every network in human space. You're going to be famous. Or court-martialed. Probably both. Hurry up. I'm picking up multiple pursuit vectors. They're angry. The next 4 minutes were the longest of life. The Whisper raced through space, her engines pushed past redline, her shields flickering as they deflected occasional long-range fire from pursuing vessels. The destroyer was gaining, its more powerful engines closing the distance, but slowly. Too slowly. Extraction point in sight, Maria announced. Lucky Fortune is in position. His cargo ship appeared on her holds open and ready. It was going to be a tricky maneuver, flying the Whisper directly into the cargo bay of a moving ship while being pursued by hostile forces, but Maria had done harder things. Probably. Shields at 20%, Sarah reported. We're taking hits. Almost there, Maria said through gritted teeth. Come on, baby, just a little further. The Whisper slipped into the Lucky Fortune's hold with meters to spare, her landing gear slamming down on the deck. The cargo doors began closing immediately. We're in, shouted. Jump now. The Lucky Fortune's hyperspace drive spun up, reality bending around the ship as she prepared to leap into faster-than-light travel. The destroyer was still 2 kilometers away, still firing, still trying to stop them. Too late. The Lucky Fortune jumped. Space twisted, colors inverted, and suddenly they were elsewhere, light years away from 442B, and the fleet and the diplomatic station that was no longer diplomatic at all. In the sudden silence, realized he'd been holding his breath. Report, he said, his voice hoarse. We made it, said, sounding surprised. We actually made it. Damage report. Hull breaches on decks 2 and 3, Sarah read from her console. Shields burned out completely, port engine is offline, but we're intact, we're alive. Slumped back in his chair, feeling the adrenaline drain from his system, leaving him exhausted and shaking. They'd done it. 12 people in a barely armed corvette had attacked a fleet of 50 capital ships, damaged their flagship, broadcast a message of defiance, and escaped alive. The odds had been 8%. They'd beaten them anyway. Said into the comm, everybody alive down there. Alive and thanking God for small miracles, replied. Also, that reactor restart I did, it definitely voided the warranty. We're going to need a complete overhaul before this ship flies again. Add it to the bill. Looked around the bridge at his crew. They were battered, exhausted, probably traumatized, and definitely looking at court-martial proceedings when they got back to human space. They were also grinning like maniacs. Good work, people, said. You just changed history. Whatever happens next, remember that. We stood up when everyone else backed down. We fought when everyone else ran. And we showed that humanity is not prey. Sir, Sarah said quietly, was it worth it, all of this? Thought about that? They'd probably started a war. They'd definitely violated multiple laws and military regulations. They'd risked their lives for what amounted to a symbolic gesture. But symbols mattered. The flag had been a symbol. Burning it had been a symbol. And attacking the flagship, broadcasting their message, standing up and fighting back, that was a symbol too. Sometimes symbols were all you had. The Lucky Fortune drifted through hyperspace, that strange realm between stars where normal physics took a vacation and distance became more suggestion than law. Inside the cargo hold, the Whisper sat silent and dark, her crew scattered throughout ship, catching their breath and trying to process what they'd just done. Stood in the Lucky Fortune's small observation deck, watching the impossible colors of hyperspace swirl past the viewport. His hands had stopped shaking, but the adrenaline crash had left him feeling hollow and ancient. You should eat something, said from behind him. She'd come up quietly, carrying 2 ration packs and a container of coffee that smelled like burned rubber but was probably better than nothing. Not hungry, said, but he took the coffee anyway. Eat anyway, you're going to need your strength for what comes next. What comes next is probably a military tribunal. Maybe, or maybe something else entirely. Pulled up a holographic display showing news feeds from across human space. Every single one was leading with the same story. His face was on half of them, freeze frames from his broadcast, his words scrolling underneath in a dozen languages. You're viral, said, and I mean that in the old Earth sense of the word, Every network has picked up the story. Social media is exploding. The reaction is split about 60-40. 60% think I'm a hero. 40% think I'm a criminal who just started a war. More like 55-45, actually. But yeah, you get the idea. The interesting part is what the government is saying, or rather, what they're not saying. Studied the feeds, press conferences with carefully worded non-statements, official declining to comment on ongoing security matters, military leadership looking grim but not actually condemning the attack. They're waiting to see which way the wind blows, realized. If public opinion supports us, they'll quietly accept it. If opinion turns against us, they'll throw us to the wolves. Politics, said with distaste. But there's more. The collective issued a response 2 hours ago. Want to hear it? Do I have a choice? Pulled up the statement. The same alien who'd burned the flag appeared on screen, his crystalline body showing visible damage. One of his appendages was missing, replaced by emergency medical equipment. His voice, translated through the feed, had lost its earlier confidence. The unprovoked attack on the Eternity's Edge was an act of terrorism perpetrated by human extremists, the said. These criminals do not represent their government or their species. The collective demands that they be turned over for prosecution immediately. Failure to comply will result in. He paused, as if reconsidering his words. Will result in severe consequences for human interests in disputed territories. The statement ended there. Replayed it, focusing on that pause. He was going to threaten war, full-scale war, but he stopped. You noticed that too, said. My contacts in intelligence think they are reassessing. They expected humans to negotiate, to back down, to accept being pushed around. Your attack changed that calculation. They're realizing that humanity might actually fight back, and they're not sure they want that war anymore. Good, fear is a better foundation for peace than weakness. Is that what this was about, making them fear us? Thought about that as he sipped the terrible coffee. No, it was about showing them we're not afraid of them. There's a difference. Fear makes you dangerous. Not being afraid makes you unpredictable, and unpredictable enemies are the hardest to fight. Appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. You need to see this. We've got an incoming transmission, military encryption. It's Admiral Richardson. Felt his stomach tighten. Richardson was Fleet Admiral, the highest-ranking officer in the Colonial Defense Forces. If he was calling personally, it meant his career was either about to end or about to get very complicated. Put him through to the communications room, said. 5 minutes later, sat in front of a display screen, his crew gathered behind him as Admiral Richardson's face materialized in high resolution. The old man looked tired, his face lined with stress and his eyes carrying the weight of command. Commander, Richardson said. Or should I say, former commander, since you resigned your commission 3 years ago. Admiral, I assume you're calling to discuss my immediate court-martial. Oh, I'm calling to discuss a lot of things. Court-martial is definitely on the list. So is treason, unauthorized military action, theft of military equipment, and about a dozen other charges that each carry a minimum sentence of 10 years in a military prison. Nodded, he'd expected this. I understand, sir. I'm prepared to turn myself in and face the consequences, but I want immunity for my crew. They were following my orders. I'm responsible for... Stop, Richardson interrupted. Just stop. Do you have any idea what you've done, the chaos you've created, the diplomatic nightmare you've handed us? I have some idea, yes. Really? Because I don't think you do. Richardson leaned forward. In the 6 hours since your attack, we've received 47 separate communications from allied species. 23 are pledging support if war breaks out with the 16 are offering to mediate. 8 are asking if humanity has lost its collective mind. And they are scrambling. They've pulled back 3 of their advance fleets. They've opened back-channel communications. And most importantly, they've stopped making threats and started making offers. Suddenly, they're very interested in negotiating proper boundaries, establishing mutual defense agreements, even discussing trade partnerships. Blinked, they're backing down. They're reassessing. You hit their flagship. You damaged a ship that was supposed to be invincible with a crew of 12 and a corvette that should have been scrapped 10 years ago. Then you broadcast that message, making it clear this wasn't official policy but individual initiative. Do you understand what that tells them? That humans are crazy. That if 12 humans on their own initiative can do that much damage, imagine what humanity could do with organized military force. You didn't just attack their flagship. You attacked their threat assessment model. They thought we were predictable, rational, that we'd always choose the safe option over the risky one. You proved them wrong, and now they don't know how to deal with us. Richardson paused, his expression softening slightly. I'm not supposed to tell you this. If anyone asks, this conversation never happened. But there are people in the government, very high-level people, who are quietly grateful for what you did. You gave us negotiating leverage we didn't have before. You reminded the galaxy that humanity has teeth. So I'm not being court-martialed. Oh, you're absolutely being court-martialed. The demanded it, and we have to show that we don't condone unauthorized military actions. But between you and me, I've seen the evidence list the prosecution is planning to present. It's surprisingly thin, and the defense attorney assigned to your case is a woman named Colonel Martinez, who happens to be one of the best military lawyers in the service and who may or may not have strong opinions about the importance of standing up to bullies. Felt a smile tugging at his lips. Thin evidence and a good defense attorney, that sounds like someone stacking the deck. I have no idea what you're talking about, Richardson said, his face completely deadpan. I'm simply ensuring that you receive a fair trial according to military law. If that trial happens to result in acquittal or minimal sentencing, well, that's just justice being served. And my crew, already being processed for immunity. As you said, they were following orders. Your orders, admittedly, but orders nonetheless. They'll face administrative review but no criminal charges. Felt relief wash over him. His team would be okay. Whatever happened to him, they'd be protected. There's one more thing, Richardson continued. Your broadcast has created a situation. Public opinion is running heavily in your favor. Calls for war are way down, but calls for stronger defensive posture are way up. People feel safer knowing that humanity is willing to fight if pushed. Congressional approval for military spending increased by 20 points overnight. Recruitment numbers are through the roof. Every young person in the colonies apparently wants to be the next. That's disturbing. That's reality. You become a symbol, not the flag, but what the flag represents. Resistance to tyranny. Willingness to stand up even when the odds are impossible. Individual initiative in defense of principle. Every propaganda office in human space is trying to figure out how to use your story. I didn't do this for propaganda. I know that's what makes it effective. You did it because you thought it was right, consequences be damned. That kind of authenticity can't be manufactured. Richardson leaned back in his chair. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to finish your journey to wherever is taking you. Then you're going to turn yourself in at the nearest military installation. There will be a trial. It will be public and highly visible. You will be found guilty of some lesser charges, given a sentence that amounts to time served and quietly released. Then you're going to retire to somewhere quiet and never do anything like this again. And if I refuse, then I'll have you arrested and the trial will be much less friendly. Don't be stupid, take the win. Thought about it, it wasn't really justice, but it was pragmatism dressed up in legal clothing. And maybe that was enough. Okay, he said, I'll play along. But answer me one question, Admiral, honestly, do you think what I did was right? Richardson was quiet for a long moment. Personally, off the record, I think what you did was insane, reckless, and violated every rule in the book. I also think it was probably necessary. Sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same. As an officer, I have to condemn what you did. As a human being, I'm glad someone finally told it to go to hell. The transmission ended. Sat in the silence of the communications room, his crew still gathered behind him. He could feel their eyes on him, waiting for him to say something, to explain what happened, to tell them what came next. Sounds like we're getting off easy, said finally. Sounds like we started a revolution, Williams corrected, even if it's not the shooting kind. Did we, though? Sarah asked. She'd been quiet since the attack, processing everything. Start a revolution, I mean, we attacked one ship, we delivered one message. What does that actually change? Turned to look at her. Everything and nothing. We didn't change the strategic situation. They still have more ships, more territory, more resources, but we changed the psychological situation. We showed that humanity won't be pushed around, that matters. Does it? Sarah pressed. Or did we just make things worse? Maybe the government was right to negotiate. Maybe avoiding war is more important than pride. It was who answered, putting a hand on his daughter's shoulder. There's a difference between avoiding war through strength and avoiding war through weakness. Before attack, we were negotiating from weakness. They burned our flag and we were going to give them what they wanted. Now we're negotiating from strength. They know we can hurt them. That changes everything. But people might still die, Sarah said. War might still happen. War was already happening, said quietly. It just wasn't being called war. They were taking our territory bit by bit, testing our boundaries, pushing to see how far they could go. That's conquest by intimidation instead of invasion, but it's still conquest. We didn't start this conflict. We just refused to pretend it wasn't happening. Spoke up from his position by the door. When I was a kid on Colony, there were these native creatures called razorbacks. Big, mean, territorial. If you ran from one, it would chase you down and kill you. But if you stood your ground, if you made yourself look bigger and more dangerous than you were, they'd back off. They are razorbacks. Running just makes them chase harder. So we showed them we're dangerous, the priest said. By being dangerous, that's not exactly a moral victory. Maybe not, agreed. But morality is complicated when you're dealing with species that see negotiation as weakness. I'm not saying we should become warmongers. I'm saying we should be willing to fight when pushed, and everyone should know it. Peace through strength, not peace through surrender. The debate continued for another hour, his crew arguing about ethics and strategy and consequences. Let them talk, knowing they needed to process what they'd done. Every person on his team had violated their own moral codes in different ways. They needed to reconcile that. Eventually, his voice came over the intercom. We're approaching the drop-off point. You wanted to be let off at the Andromeda station, right? Where you can turn yourself in. That's right, confirmed. ETA is 4 hours. Suggest everyone get some rest. You're all going to need it for what comes next. Made his way to the small cabin had assigned him. It was barely large enough for a bunk and a small storage locker, but it was private. He sealed the door behind him and sat on the bunk, suddenly exhausted. His communicator buzzed. Another message, this one from, "You crazy son of a bitch, I just got word from my co. I'm being investigated for helping you. Nothing's going to stick, though. I made sure everything was deniable and I've got friends running interference. But here's the important part, it was worth it. Every sensor station in 3 sectors recorded your attack. Every analyst in fleet intelligence has studied the footage, and everyone's come to the same conclusion. They are beatable. Their ships are powerful, but they're not invincible. Their tactics are predictable. Their response time is slow. If it came to war, we'd take casualties, but we'd win. That knowledge is already changing policy discussions. The appeasement faction has lost most of its political support. So thanks, you didn't just attack a flagship, you gave humanity its confidence back. Out. Saved the message and lay back on the bunk, staring at the ceiling. His body ached from the adrenaline crash and the stress of the past few days. His mind was racing, replaying the attack, second-guessing decisions, wondering if there had been a better way. But under all of that was something else, a sense of rightness, of having done what needed to be done, regardless of cost or consequence. He'd seen the flag burn. He'd watched humanity's symbol reduced to ash by an alien who thought humans were nothing. And he'd made sure that alien would never make that mistake again. 3 days from burning to battle, from insult to war, from symbol to action. It had taken 5 minutes to change the course of history. Closed his eyes, finally allowing himself to rest. Tomorrow he would turn himself in. Tomorrow the trial would begin. Tomorrow he would face the consequences of his choices. But tonight, for just a few hours, he could sleep knowing that he'd stood up when everyone else backed down. That was enough. In the cargo hold, the Whisper sat silent and damaged, her hull by weapons fire, her systems burned out from the desperate escape. She looked like she'd been through a war. Because she had. And somewhere in the Empire, on a flagship undergoing emergency repairs, an alien who thought humans were prey was learning that evolution doesn't stop just because you reach the stars. Humans had been predators once, apex hunters on Earth. They'd built civilization to contain that nature, to channel it into constructive paths. But the instincts were still there, buried under layers of culture and law and philosophy. They had stripped away those layers. They'd reminded humanity what it was capable of when pushed. That was a lesson the galaxy wouldn't forget anytime soon. 4 hours later, the Lucky Fortune emerged from hyperspace near Andromeda Station, a massive orbital platform that served as a regional military headquarters. Patrol vessels immediately hailed them. sensors sweeping the cargo ship for threats. This is Andromeda Control to cargo vessel Lucky Fortune. State your business and prepare for inspection. Opened a channel. This is Captain of the Lucky Fortune. I'm carrying and his crew. We're here to turn ourselves in. There was a long pause on the other end. Stand by, Lucky Fortune. Do not attempt to leave the area. Military police units are being dispatched. 20 minutes later, Marines in full combat gear boarded the Lucky Fortune, weapons ready, clearly expecting trouble. They found 12 people sitting quietly in the cargo hold, waiting to be arrested. The Marine lieutenant in charge looked confused. "Commander." "That's me," said, standing up. "You're under arrest for unauthorized military action, theft of military property, and various other charges that my commanding officer will explain. I need you to come with me." "I understand," held out his hands for restraints. The lieutenant looked even more confused. "Sir, that's not necessary. We're not treating you as a hostile, just as someone who needs to come with us for processing." Lowered his hands. "Fair enough, my crew." "They're being processed separately. Immunity agreements are already in place. They'll be released after giving statements." Looked at his team one last time, gave him a sharp nod, and Sarah stood together, the father's arm around his daughter's shoulder, offered a crisp salute despite the informal circumstances. Williams just smiled his cold smile, made the sign of the cross in its direction, a blessing or a prayer or maybe just a goodbye. "It's been an honor," said to all of them. "The honor was ours," replied. "Now go face your court-martial with the same courage you showed the..." Followed the Marines off the ship, through the corridors of Andromeda Station, past crew members who stopped to stare and whisper. He could hear fragments of conversation. "That's him, the guy who attacked the... I heard he did it with just 12 people. My sister says he's a hero. My brother says he's a criminal. Maybe he's both." The Marines delivered him to a detention area that was more comfortable quarters than prison cell. A desk, a bed, a private bathroom, and a window looking out at the stars. Not bad for someone facing court-martial. An officer appeared at the door an hour later. "Commander, I'm Colonel Martinez. I've been assigned as your defense attorney." She was younger than expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools. She set a briefcase on the desk and pulled out a holographic display. "I've reviewed your case," Martinez said without preamble. "The prosecution has 37 charges filed against you. Most of them won't stick. The rest I can get reduced to minor offenses with time served. But I need you to work with me. No heroic speeches about taking responsibility. No refusing to mount a defense out of some misguided sense of honor. You play this smart and you walk out of here in 6 months. You play it stupid and you spend the next 10 years in prison. Understand?" "I understand," said, "but I need to know something first. Whose side are you on, mine or the government's?" Martinez smiled, sharp and predatory. "I'm on the side of justice. And justice, in this case, means making sure that the man who reminded humanity how to stand up doesn't get destroyed by the same government that benefits from what he did. So yeah, I'm on your side. Now let's get to work." They worked through the night, building a defense that was part legal technicality, part public relations, and part appeal to military tradition. Martinez was brilliant, picking apart the prosecution's case with surgical precision, finding loopholes and precedents that hadn't even known existed. By morning, actually believed he might survive this. The trial began 3 weeks later. The courtroom was packed with observers, media representatives, and military brass. The judge was a stern-looking woman named Admiral No Relation, who had a reputation for fairness and intolerance for nonsense. The prosecution opened with a fiery speech about the sanctity of chain of command, the danger of unauthorized military actions, and the need to maintain discipline in the ranks. They painted as a rogue operator who'd risked starting a war for personal glory. Martinez's opening was simpler. "The prosecution wants you to believe that Commander acted out of ego or recklessness. Let me show you what really happened." She played the footage of the flag burning. Every person in the courtroom watched in silence as the casually destroyed a symbol that represented centuries of human struggle and sacrifice. She played the speech about humanity being primitive mammals. She played the threats and ultimatums. Then she played broadcast from the whisper. "This is what duty looks like when orders fail," Martinez said. This is what service means when leadership hesitates. Commander didn't act out of glory. He acted because somebody had to and nobody else was willing to. The prosecution calls this reckless. I call it courage. The trial lasted for 2 weeks. Witnesses, experts analyzed the attack. Military historians debated the precedents. Public opinion, monitored carefully by both sides, remained generally supportive of. And slowly, subtly, the charges began to disappear. Theft of military property became unauthorized use of equipment. Unauthorized military action became conduct unbecoming. Treason wasn't even mentioned after the first day. On the final day of the trial, Admiral called the court to order. This court has heard extensive testimony regarding the actions of Commander. We've debated law, precedent, and principle. We've examined both the letter of military regulations and the spirit of military service. And now we must render judgment. She paused, looking directly at. Commander, please stand. Stood, his heart pounding despite Martinez's confident predictions. This court finds you guilty of unauthorized use of military equipment, conduct unbecoming an officer, and failure to follow proper authorization procedures. You are hereby sentenced to 6 months detention, time served, and forfeit of 1 year's retirement pay. You are also prohibited from serving in any official military capacity for a period of 5 years. Do you understand these terms? Yes, ma'am, said. Good, then this court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Felt Martinez's hand on his shoulder. Told you, she said quietly. 6 months, time served, you're free to go. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Gave a brief statement about respecting the court's decision, accepting responsibility for his actions, and hoping that his actions had sent a message about humanity's willingness to defend its principles. Then he walked away from the cameras, from the crowds, from the attention. Was waiting by a transport, along with the rest of his crew. So, she said, what now? Thought about that? He'd spent 20 years in the service, 3 years trying to retire, and 1 insane week proving that he wasn't done fighting after all. Now, he said, now we go home, rest, recover, and wait to see what kind of galaxy we've created. And if they come back, if someone else burns our flag. Smiled, then I guess we'll have to remind them again. Some lessons have to be taught more than once. They boarded the transport, 12 people who'd changed the course of history with 1 corvette and 5 minutes of fury. The galaxy was different now, shifted in subtle ways that would take years to fully understand. Humanity had shown it wasn't prey. They had learned to fear what they'd dismissed, and somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, other species were recalculating their own assumptions about humans. All because one man had seen a flag burn and decided that some things couldn't be tolerated. History, reflected as the transport pulled away from Andromeda Station, wasn't made by governments or politicians or committees. It was made by individuals who decided that now was the time to act, consequences be damned. 6 months after the trial, lived in a small house on the edge of a colony world called Haven's Rest. The house was nothing special, a prefabricated structure with basic amenities and a view of rolling hills that reminded him of Earth landscapes he'd only seen in pictures. It was quiet, peaceful, exactly what he'd been looking for when he first retired before a flag burned and everything changed. He spent his mornings tending a small garden, coaxing vegetables from the alien soil, with techniques passed down from colonists who'd been working this land for generations. His afternoons were for reading, mostly history books and military theory, studying the patterns of how civilizations rose and fell. His evenings were for watching the sunset and trying not to think about the fact that he'd become a symbol for something he wasn't entirely sure he understood. The reporters had stopped calling after the first month. The interview requests had dried up after the second. By the third month, had achieved what he'd been craving, anonymity. He was just another retired serviceman on a colony world, notable only to his neighbors for growing excellent tomatoes. Then, on a morning that started like any other, his communicator buzzed with an encrypted message. Military encryption, high-level clearance. Almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won out. Commander, this is Admiral Richardson. I need you to come to Naval Headquarters. There's a situation that requires your specific expertise. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Please respond ASAP. Stared at the message for a long moment. He'd been explicitly barred from military service for 5 years. Whatever situation Richardson was dealing with wasn't supposed to be involved. He typed a response. Admiral, with respect, I'm retired and legally prohibited from military operations. You need someone else. The reply came back in 30 seconds. This isn't a military operation. It's a diplomatic one, and you're not prohibited from providing consultation to government officials. I need you here, they are back, and they're asking for you specifically. That got attention. 2 days later, he stood in Admiral Richardson's office at Naval Headquarters, a sprawling complex on the moon orbiting humanity's capital world. Richardson looked older than he had during the trial, the stress of command aging him in ways that mere time couldn't match. Thank you for coming, Richardson said, gesturing to a chair. I know you were enjoying your retirement. I was growing tomatoes, said. Now I'm here, what's this about the... Richardson activated a holographic display. It showed the 442B system, the same one where had attacked the Eternity's Edge. But the fleet was gone now, replaced by a small diplomatic vessel holding position near the abandoned diplomatic station. 3 days ago, we received a message from the collective. They want to resume negotiations. Full diplomatic recognition, trade agreements, mutual defense protocols, the works. But they have one condition. Let me guess, said, they want me there. Not just you, they want you to lead the human delegation. Laughed, it came out harsh and bitter. They want the man who attacked their flagship to lead diplomatic negotiations. That's insane. That's what I said, but they were insistent. They said, and I'm quoting here, we will only negotiate with a human who understands both strength and restraint. Commander proved he possesses both qualities. We trust him to represent his species honestly. They trust me because I hurt them. No, Richardson said carefully. They trust you because you could have done more damage but chose not to. Your broadcast made it clear this wasn't total war. It was a measured response to a specific insult. That level of control impressed them. They see you as someone who can fight when necessary but doesn't want war for its own sake. Walked to the window, looking out at Earth hanging in the void below. The planet that had birthed humanity, that had sent its children to the stars, that had nearly destroyed itself a dozen times before finally learning to reach beyond its atmosphere. I'm not a diplomat, he said. No, you're not, but you're something they understand. A warrior who fights for principle, not profit. Someone who can't be bought or intimidated. They respect that. And if I refuse? Then the negotiations probably fall apart, and we're back to the slow-motion conflict we had before your attack. Territorial disputes, trade restrictions, occasional skirmishes. Eventually, it escalates into something worse. Thought about his crew, about and the others who'd risked everything on that 5-minute war. They'd fought to send a message. Now the recipients of that message were actually listening and was being asked to finish what he'd started. What does the government want out of these negotiations? He asked. Officially, peaceful coexistence, clear boundaries, mutual respect for territorial claims. Unofficially, we want them to understand that humanity won't be pushed around, but we're not looking for conquest either. We want them to see us as equals, not threats and not prey. And you think I can deliver that? I think you already did. The attack on the Eternity's Edge established that we're dangerous. Now we need someone who can establish that we're reasonable. You're the only person who can credibly do both. Turned back from the window. I'll need full authority. If I'm going to negotiate, I need to be able to make real decisions without checking with committees every 5 minutes. You'll have it. The Secretary General has already signed off. You'll be special envoy with plenipotentiary powers. Whatever agreements you reach, the government will honor. That's a lot of trust to put in a man who was court-martialed 6 months ago. You earned it, Richardson said simply. By proving that you'll do what's right even when it costs you everything. That's the kind of person we need representing us. Considered, it was a trap in a way. Except, and he'd be drawn back into the world he'd been trying to escape. Refuse, and he'd be abandoning the very principles he'd fought for. Not much of a choice, really. Okay, said, I'll do it, but I'm bringing my own team. Your crew from the Whisper. Some of them for security assessment, for cultural perspective, for medical and humanitarian concerns. I'll need official diplomatic staff too, people who actually know how negotiation works. Done, you'll have whatever you need. Richardson extended his hand. Thank you, I know this isn't what you wanted. Shook the hand. What I wanted was to grow tomatoes in peace, but what I needed was to finish what I started, so here we are. The journey to 442B took 2 weeks on a proper diplomatic vessel, a far cry from the desperate run in the Whisper. Used the time to assemble his team and review everything humanity knew about culture, psychology, and negotiation tactics. What he learned was fascinating and disturbing. There were a crystalline species that thought in terms of geometric patterns and mathematical elegance. They valued strength because strength was predictable, quantifiable, something that could be measured and compared. Weakness was unpredictable, chaotic, something that made no sense in their worldview. When they'd burned the flag, they'd been testing humanity's response. They'd expected either military retaliation that they could easily defeat or diplomatic capitulation that would establish their dominance. Instead, they'd gotten something they hadn't predicted, a small unit attack that did significant damage, and then without seeking to press the advantage. In thinking that made no sense. If you were strong enough to hurt an enemy, you were strong enough to keep fighting until they were destroyed. Choosing to stop while you still had strength was elegant, restrained. It showed understanding of when violence was sufficient versus when it was excessive. That restraint had earned their respect in ways that either total war or total peace never could have. So we hit them just hard enough to prove we could hurt them, then stopped to prove we weren't trying to destroy them, said as they reviewed the cultural analysis. And somehow that makes us ideal negotiating partners. It's about predictability, said. They can predict how an aggressive species will behave. They can predict how a passive species will behave. But a species that can be both aggressive and restrained, depending on context, that's harder to predict. It means they have to actually negotiate instead of just applying force or threats. Still seems strange to ask the guy who attacked them to lead talks. Not really. I'm the proof that humanity can fight. Now I need to be the proof that humanity can also build peace. Two sides of the same coin. The diplomatic vessel was waiting when they arrived. It was smaller than the Eternity's Edge, but no less impressive, a crystalline structure that caught the system's starlight and broke it into rainbow patterns. Had never seen one up close without trying to shoot it. "Vessel, this is Special Envoy," said into the comm. "We're ready to begin negotiations." The response came in perfect English, the translator software smoothing out the glass-breaking quality of the voice. "Welcome, Commander. We have prepared a neutral meeting location on the diplomatic station. Our delegation will meet you there in 2 hours." The diplomatic station had been restored since the deadline had passed. New sections had been built, combining human and architecture in ways that were sometimes beautiful and sometimes deeply strange. The meeting room was in one of the new sections, a large space with a table that was half human design, half crystalline structure. Entered with his team, wearing his old dress uniform at Richardson's insistence. "You're both a warrior and a diplomat now," the Admiral had said. "Dress the part." The delegation was already seated. 5 of them, their crystalline bodies refracting the room's light in disorienting patterns, and at the center of the group was a figure recognized. The one who'd burned the flag. He looked different now. One of his appendages was but still showing signs of new crystal growth, slightly lighter in color than the rest of his body. His face, or what passed for a face in anatomy, bore visible scarring from the attack on the Eternity's Edge. "Commander," the said, rising from his seat. "I am Coordinator. We have met before, though under different circumstances." "I remember," said evenly. "You burned my flag, I blew up your ship, seemed only fair." They made a sound that their translator rendered as laughter. "Indeed, a proportional response. That is why we requested you specifically. You understand balance." Took his seat across from them. "Let's be clear about something. I'm here to negotiate peace, but I'm not here to pretend the past didn't happen. You insulted my species. I made you pay for it. Now we need to decide if we're going to keep escalating or find a better way forward." "Direct communication," another said approvingly. "This is good. Coordinator, perhaps you should explain our perspective." Leaned forward, his crystalline structure catching the light. "Commander, when I burned your flag, I believed I understood humanity. You had expanded through alliance and trade, avoiding conflict where possible. Your military was adequate but not exceptional. Your diplomatic approach was cautious, always seeking to avoid war. To my analysis, this indicated weakness. And now I understand that I confused preference for incapability." Humans prefer peace, but you are not incapable of war. That is a crucial distinction. When pushed beyond your tolerance threshold, you respond with precision and overwhelming force. Then you stop when the lesson has been taught. This is not weakness. This is strength under control. Studied the alien who'd caused all of this. You're saying you respect us now because we hurt you. I'm saying we respect you because you could have hurt us much more and chose not to. Your attack damaged our flagship but minimized casualties. You disabled our ships but did not destroy them. You sent a message without trying to annihilate us. That showed strategic thinking and ethical restraint. Both are qualities we value in potential allies. Allies spoke up. 6 months ago you were trying to conquer this sector. 6 months ago we believed conquest would be easy, said bluntly. Commander proved otherwise. Now we must recalculate our strategic approach. A species that can coordinate the kind of attack your team executed with minimal resources and no official support is not one we wish to fight an extended war against. Far better to establish clear boundaries and mutual interests. Over the next 3 weeks, they negotiated. Territory boundaries, trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, mutual defense pacts. They gave ground on issues where they'd been aggressive before. Humans accepted compromises that might have been unthinkable before the attack. But the real negotiation wasn't about territory or trade. It was about respect. They needed to understand that humanity had limits, lines that couldn't be crossed without consequences. Humans needed to understand that the thought in terms of geometric efficiency and mathematical optimization, not malice or cruelty. It was who finally articulated what they were really building. Commander, our species made an error in judgment. We saw your expansion as random, driven by necessity rather than choice. We saw your diplomacy as weakness rather than preference. We saw your restraint as inability rather than control. The attack on the Eternity's Edge corrected all those misconceptions simultaneously. It was, in its own way, elegant. Elegant, repeated. That's one word for it. I'd have said desperate. Desperation and elegance are not mutually exclusive. You were desperate to send a message. You chose the most elegant solution possible. A single ship, minimal casualties, maximum symbolic impact. You could have waited for official military response and killed thousands in a full fleet engagement. Instead, you risked 12 lives to prove a point. That efficiency is something we understand. So what happens now? Asked. We sign these agreements and hope both our species actually honor them. We signed these agreements knowing that violation would be catastrophic for both sides. Your attack proved you can hurt us. Our fleet size proves we can hurt you. Neither of us wants that war. Therefore, we build something better. Not perfect peace, perhaps, but workable coexistence based on mutual strength and mutual respect. On the final day of negotiations, they gathered in the meeting room one last time to sign the formal agreements. The documents were bilingual human text on one side, geometric patterns on the other, saying the same things in very different ways. Signed his name at the bottom of the human section, officially committing humanity to a new relationship with the species that had threatened war 6 months ago. Pressed his appendage into the crystalline section, leaving a mark that only a could make. This is historic, one of the human diplomatic staff said. First formal treaty between humans and... It's more than that, said. It's proof that understanding can emerge from conflict. We would never have reached this point without Commander's attack. Violence was not the goal, but it was the catalyst for comprehension. After the signing, asked for a private conversation. They walked through the diplomatic station's observation deck, looking out at the stars. I must ask you something, said. When you attacked the Eternity's Edge, were you prepared to die? Yes, answered without hesitation. And your crew? Same answer. For a symbol, for a flag. His voice carried something that might have been confusion or respect or both. This is difficult for us to process. In culture, we fight for resources, territory, strategic advantage. We fight for tangible goals with measurable outcomes. But you fought for something intangible, for honor, for principle, for the abstract idea of what your flag represented. That's what makes us human, said. We fight for ideas as fiercely as we fight for survival, sometimes more fiercely. It makes you unpredictable. It makes us free. We're not bound by pure logic or efficiency. We can choose to do the impractical thing if we believe it's right. Was silent for a moment, his crystalline body catching the starlight. When I burned your flag, I thought I was demonstrating dominance. Instead, I triggered a response that nearly destroyed my ship and fundamentally altered my civilization's relationship with yours. The inefficiency of my action compared to its consequences is profound. You made a mistake, said. We all do. The question is whether we learn from them. Have you learned from your mistakes? Thought about that? About the attack, the trial, the consequences, both intended and unintended. I've learned that violence should be a last resort, but sometimes it's a necessary one. I've learned that symbols matter, sometimes more than practical considerations. And I've learned that the galaxy is complicated enough that simple answers are usually wrong. Wisdom, said. Hard-earned and valuable. Commander, I must tell you something. When I recovered from the injuries sustained during your attack, when I saw the damage to my ship and realized how close you came to killing me and everyone aboard, my first response was rage. I wanted to hunt you down personally and destroy you. Understandable. But then I studied your broadcast. I listened to your words, and I realized you weren't trying to destroy us. You were trying to teach us. The lesson was harsh but necessary. Without it, we would have continued our expansion, eventually triggering a war that would have cost millions of lives on both sides. Your 5-minute war prevented a decades-long conflict. I didn't plan it that way, admitted. I was just angry that you burned our flag. The best historical outcomes are rarely planned. They emerge from individuals making choices in moments of crisis. You chose to fight when others counseled retreat. That choice changed everything. They stood in silence for a while, human and former enemies now bound by treaty and mutual understanding. What will you do now? Asked. Return to your retirement. Probably. I'm not cut out for diplomatic life. I prefer growing vegetables to negotiating treaties. That is perhaps the most remarkable thing about you, Commander. You have the power to wage war and the wisdom to prefer peace. That combination is rare in any species. Returned to Haven's Rest 3 months after leaving. The house was exactly as he'd left it, the garden overgrown but salvageable. He spent his first week back clearing weeds and replanting vegetables, falling into familiar rhythms. But things were different now. The communicator buzzed regularly with messages from former crew members, had taken a position training Special Forces units in unconventional warfare, had written a book about the attack that was climbing bestseller lists across human space, had returned to his priesthood, but occasionally consulted for military chaplains dealing with combat trauma. And Sarah, the young woman who'd been terrified during the attack, had enlisted in the Navy. She sent a message from her training base. Commander, I wanted you to know that I'm following in your footsteps, not because I want glory or fame, but because you showed me that sometimes ordinary people have to stand up and do extraordinary things. Thank you for that lesson. Sarah. Saved the message and added it to a folder he'd been building. Letters from young people who'd been inspired by the attack. Notes from veterans who said it reminded them why they'd served. Messages from colonists who felt safer knowing humanity would fight when pushed. He didn't ask for any of it. He just wanted to make a point to the... But somehow that point had resonated across human space, reminding millions of people what their species was capable of when principles were on the line. One afternoon, 6 months after his return, received a package. No return address, just a military routing code that suggested it came from somewhere official. Inside was a flag. The flag, or rather, a reproduction of it because the original had burned to ash. The same 50 stars, the same 13 stripes, the same colors that had represented humanity's journey from a single planet to the stars. There was a note attached. Commander, this flag flew aboard the Eternity's Edge after repairs were completed. Coordinator requested it be placed in a position of honor on his ship, as a reminder of the day he learned to respect humanity. He asked that it eventually be sent to you. Consider it a gift from a former enemy who became an unlikely ally. Admiral Richardson. Hung the flag in his house, in a place where he could see it every morning when he woke up. It wasn't the original that had burned, but in some ways it was more important. It represented not just human history, but the bridge between species, built on the foundation of conflict and respect. Years passed, the treaty held, trade flourished, cultural exchanges became common. Young humans learned to appreciate crystalline architecture. Young studied human literature and philosophy. The two species would never be identical in their thinking, but they learned to coexist. And whenever someone asked about the attack on the Eternity's Edge, about the 5-minute war that changed the galaxy, he'd give them a simple answer. I saw the flag burn, I couldn't let that stand. Everything else followed from that moment. It wasn't poetry, it wasn't particularly eloquent, but it was true. Sometimes the most important decisions in history come down to simple choices. Stand up or back down, fight or flee, accept the insult or make them pay. Had chosen to stand up, to fight, to make them pay. And in doing so, he'd changed not just human relations, but humanity's understanding of itself. The attack had been a reminder that humans weren't just diplomatic, reasonable, civilized creatures. They were all of those things, but underneath was something older, something primal and fierce. They were warriors who'd chosen to be peaceful. But that choice was always theirs to make, and they could unmake it when circumstances demanded. That was the lesson That was the lesson humanity had relearned about itself. And that was the legacy of a Navy SEAL who'd seen a flag burn and decided to wage a 5-minute war. A decade after the attack, died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 67. He was buried with full military honors despite his court-martial, the government having quietly pardoned him years earlier. The funeral was attended by thousands, including a delegation led by Coordinator. He was a warrior who taught us peace through the language of war, said at the memorial service. He was an enemy who became a friend by refusing to be a victim. He was human in all the ways that word implies, both the fierce and the gentle. The galaxy is diminished by his passing. The Whisper, the battered corvette that had carried, and his crew on their impossible mission, was restored and placed in a museum. Visitors from dozens of species came to see the small ship that had changed the balance of power in an entire sector of space. And in classrooms across human colonies, teachers told the story of the flag that burned and the man who made the burners regret it. They told it as a lesson about courage, about principle, about knowing when to fight and when to stop fighting. Some called a hero, some called him a criminal, some called him both. But everyone agreed on one thing. He was the man who reminded humanity that strength wasn't just about having weapons or territory or resources. True strength was about knowing when to use force and when to hold back, when to fight, and when to build peace. It was about being strong enough to be gentle and gentle enough to be strong. That was his legacy. That was what the 5-minute war had taught. And as the decades passed and human civilization continued to expand across the stars, encountering new species and facing new challenges, they carried that lesson with them. Stand up when pushed, fight when necessary, but always remember that the goal isn't victory over others, it's peace with dignity. Had lived that principle, and in the end, that was enough. The flag still flew on ships and stations across human space. It still represented the same ideals it always had: freedom, courage, the willingness to stand up for what's right even when the cost is high. But now it carried an additional meaning, one that had given it through his actions. It meant that humanity would not be conquered, intimidated, or dismissed. It meant that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed impossible. And it meant that sometimes, when everything else failed, one person making one choice in one moment could change the course of history. That was the true legacy of the 5-minute war. Not the tactics or the strategy or the diplomatic consequences, but the simple truth that individuals matter, that choices have weight, and that courage is contagious. A Navy SEAL had seen a flag burn. 3 days later, he'd waged a war. 5 minutes changed everything, and the galaxy would never be the same. He'd acted, the rest was up to history to judge. Yes, said finally, it was worth it. Another word for expensive, and they were about to pay the price. And it would only take 5 minutes.